Welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast, the show by fans for fans of your Milwaukee Brewers.
All right, Brewer fans, welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast. Looks like we'll be looking for a new manager. This is Craig, and joining me is Vince, your host of the Brew Crew Review. How's it going, Vince?
Hey, it's going well, Craig. I was just thinking back to something here that was kind of interesting with the news coming out about our manager. We started our show in 2004. It was also Craig Counsell's first year as a Milwaukee Brewer.
Wow, yeah. And that's interesting. Yeah, the entire time of the Brew Crew Review, he's been a member of the organization. So it's definitely quite the loss. And not only are Brewer fans heartbroken, but they are also offended and disgusted with the fact that he signed a 5-year contract to manage the Chicago Cubs for $40 million. That's $8 million a year, which blows the highest paid manager salary completely out of the water. And so the Brewers reportedly at least had offered him up to $5.5 million a year, which would have also beaten the previous record. But apparently the Cubs had more money that they're willing to give him. And not only that, but there's a lot of just speculation going around, and some of it has now been confirmed by Antanasio. But apparently, at some point in early September, he had notified Brewers owner Mark Antanasio that he was planning on looking for other opportunities at the end of the season and not willing to sign a contract extension with the Milwaukee Brewers. So that's interesting. What was your reaction to hearing the news, Vince?
You know, my overwhelming reaction was shock. I think. We had talked about it on our podcast that for several of the last episodes, the possibility of him leaving. And obviously there were a lot of reports that he could be going to the Mets, he could be going to the Astros, he could be going to the Guardians. You know, there were rumors, of course. I had, to be honest, assumed he would end up coming back to Milwaukee, if I'm being honest. And I think, though, that what shocked me the most wasn't that he left. It was certainly that he left for the Cubs. I know that, money speaks volumes. You go where you're paid the most. I understand that. What really surprises me the most out of the news from yesterday is that he didn't give the Brewers, number one, the opportunity to match. Number two, he didn't give other teams who may have deeper pockets the opportunity to match. He didn't call the Mets with the Cubs offer. So that leads to number three. It's like he had always wanted to go to the Cubs. And number four, I really just don't know what happened, but clearly there's some major organizational issues going on where Craig wanted to leave, and I don't think that comes down just to money. You don't make that decision in early September if that's just a play for money, because you don't even know what you can get on the open market at that point. And clearly there's some sort of organizational dysfunction that's been ongoing. We've seen David Stearns leave. We've seen Craig Counsell leave now. We've seen others leave. I know that happens in sports. Certainly it happens in all businesses, but, and certainly sports is not immune from that. But I just think that there is some level of organizational discord when you lose your hometown manager without even getting an opportunity to match what he was able to get on the open market. Again, in my naivete, I kind of assumed that, Craig would come back with offers from one or several clubs and say to the Brewers, listen, this is what I'm worth. I'd like you to match it. And if the Brewers couldn't do that, that's when a hard decision might be made. But, to have Antanasio get surprised yesterday that Craig was going to our biggest rival and who, technically couldn't have negotiated with Craig until November 1st. And we're sitting here less than a week later and he's the new manager and he's the highest paid manager in baseball. It screams that there are both more major organizational issues going on and that this has been coming for quite some time.
Yeah, trying to look at it from Craig's perspective. First of all, I'm sure all Brewer fans have heard this. I think last year the Brewers put out some kind of promo featuring Craig Counsell, where he's talking about how he is the Milwaukee Brewers. He is you as a fan. He was there seeing Robin Yount, ride his motorcycle at the 82 World Series, and he was there during all these times, including being a member of the team. during our 2008 and 2011 playoff runs and whatnot. And then he's been, of course, the manager. So he's really been part of our team in like 75% of our playoff appearances. He's from Whitefish Bay. We all know the whole narrative. His dad used to work in the front office of the Brewers. There's tons of it that really says that this is a guy that would be loyal to the Brewers as long as we offered him a fair contract. However, this appears not to be the case, and all the details are still emerging from this. But I just pointed out, it seemed like at some point, for some reason, and we don't know if someone from the Cubs organization reached out to him and said, "Hey, we're willing to pay you a lot to come manage our team. Do you have any interest there?" Sometime, and he decided to do that at some point. Apparently, and before the season ended, so according to Antanasio in September. So really, at that point, Antanasio's hands were tied. I do wonder if it was one of those things where he just was not happy with the direction of the organization. And I guess I'd point fingers directly at our owner, Mark Antanasio, for that.
Yeah.
Was it, like, again, speculating here, was he frustrated that the Brewers kept making the playoffs, but we weren't doing more to put us over the top to get us deeper in the playoffs? Was he frustrated that a contract offer was not a significant contract offer, or just a show of loyalty was not given to him far in advance of him reaching the end of his contract? Which to me seemed to be like it should have been the no-brainer,
Yeah. Well, I think maybe both is the answer. I mean, if I'm in Craig Counsell's position and I'm managing a first place team, I hate to go back to this every episode, but if I'm managing a first place team and ownership decides to trade my all-star closer, well, I'm sitting there, expecting to get players that are going to help the team during the course of that season, I would probably be a little bit miffed too. I mean, at this point, and again, it's not that Craig took the most money. A lot of people are kind of defending him today on social media, and fair enough. But it's not that I begrudge anyone for taking the highest salary that's offered to them. I think that that's natural and that most of us would do that. What I do begrudge is, well, ownership, first of all, for, I guess, getting us to this point and making it so it seems somewhat reasonable that he'd want to leave. And two, I do think that, a certain amount of loyalty maybe would have been to allow the Brewers to match any offer that he received from other teams. And if the Brewers weren't willing to pay that, I think that a deep-pocketed team like the Mets may have if you would have taken them the Cubs offer. So, it was almost like a choice that he made, that he had predetermined that the Cubs were going to be that team, because they didn't even have a managerial vacancy until an hour before the news broke. And so I would think that it's certainly something that he had been thinking about for quite some time. And one of the quotes that was revealing to me from the press conference last night was that the Cubs job was, quote, a dream job for Craig.
Okay, well, I mean, then you got to think of it, maybe after being a Milwaukee Brewers fan as a child, he wasn't necessarily a diehard Brewer fans, like, of course, all of us and all of our listeners. But the matter is, he did win a World Series with both the Arizona Diamondbacks as a player and the Florida Marlins as a player. And so maybe his loyalty does not necessarily align with just the Milwaukee Brewers. He also, of course, graduated from college at Notre Dame, which is not too far from Chicago. Maybe he was a closet Cubs fan all of his youth. In fact, when the Brewers used to be in a different league than the Cubs, myself in the 80s actually used to be a Cubs fan as well. When just talking about rooting for National League teams, and obviously with the Superstation WGN, they were kind of likable, and there was something appealing to them as a kid. It was like lovable losers, and they had Harry Carey in the announcing booth, which again, very appealing to a child. And also just some of the players. Ryan Sandberg used to be one of my favorite players, and he was a Cub. So I mean, maybe Counsell had all those same kind of warm feelings toward the Cubs. You would think those have gone away since they became, I don't know, division rivals for the last 20 plus years, and crosstown rivals, so to speak. And so I don't get. There are other people speculating that he was just offended that he didn't get offered or shown more loyalty by the Brewers, or whatever reason, something about the Brewers organization, like you're speculating on, really made him upset. The fact that he wanted to leave, giving them the quote unquote the middle finger. And I don't think there's any better way to do that than the way he did. So, I mean, my reaction to it, you could call it shock, you could call it heartbreak, but really, it was a couple levels beyond that. It'd be the equivalent reaction I would have if someone punched my grandmother in my face in front of me.
Yeah.
Anger, and I want to hurt someone, basically. And so it's just,
It's kind of
it's
like
just,
if you found your wife cheating on you with like your best friend or something. I mean,
yeah.
it's crazy the amount of betrayal that you go through, even though you can understand it from a business perspective. But being a fan is, again, it's short for fanatic, which means that you're a little crazy about these things. And there are loyalty issues that do pop up. And I will say too, Craig, one of the things that really surprises me is the fact that he was willing to risk throwing away his entire reputation in Wisconsin. I really do think that now he is going to be a despised figure for Brewer fans for the foreseeable future. And this is for a Wisconsin guy. And, people were comparing it to the Packers losing Brett Favre to the Vikings. And I don't even think I think it's even worse than that, because the Packers were the ones that traded Favre, to the Jets back in the day. Before he even went to Minnesota. So I think
No, it's actually absolutely worse than that, because Favre wasn't from here either. I mean, whatever.
that's true. And so I got, in terms of my sadness level yesterday, on a personal level, it was probably reminding me the most of Paul Molitor going to the Blue Jays between the 1992 and 1993 seasons. And Brewer fans of a certain age, at least, will certainly remember that the Brewers and Blue Jays were pretty bitter rivals there for a stretch in the late 80s, early 90s. And they, to see Molitor go to a division rival is the thing that approximated this the most to me. And even in that situation, it turns out that the Brewers didn't even offer Molitor a contract, so he had to go somewhere. Where in this case, Counsell was offered a contract to become the highest paid manager in baseball. I understand that you can't just denigrate somebody for taking more money that the Cubs did offer, but certainly I think that him losing his status as kind of a folk hero in Wisconsin should have mattered a little bit more to someone who's from here, like Craig Counsell. And my brother put it pretty good, or in a pretty good way yesterday. We were talking, and he's like, yesterday morning when we woke up, Craig Counsell would have been, arguably at least, on the Brewers Mount Rushmore. The winningest manager in franchise history, played for the team, local kid makes good, all that stuff. And now he's despised by just about all the fan base. And I don't think that would have happened if he would have just gone to the Mets. It would have hurt. It would have stung for a couple of days, but you understand business, and you understand that it's going to be, a decision that you might make as well. But again, to go to the Cubs and then to not have given the Brewers a chance to match is really what's kind of grating.
Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, with the Mets example, obviously you can understand someone who's a quote unquote free agent taking the job that's offering the best money. I mean, that's just how it works. That's every free agent ball player that's ever been out there. I'm sure there's places they'd like to go, but they always went where the most money was offered. And that's pretty much true. And it's weird because very casual fans don't understand that. They're like, oh, what's the difference between $5.5 million or $8 million a year? You're rich either way. Like, why don't you just stay by your family? This, that. Well, I'm sorry, but it's $2.5 million per season. If for over 5 seasons, if that was actually the offer, you're talking that's $12.5 million more. That is a lifetime of money for anyone. More money. So you can't fault someone for taking that deal if offered. So I don't know really who has the blame. I think there's plenty of animosity. Right now it's being directed toward Craig Counsell. I have a feeling that over time, when more details come out, maybe a lot more of that animosity will actually be directed toward the owner, Mark Antanasio, if it's not already. But I think there's a lot.
Oh, yeah. He was certainly getting it yesterday on social media, though, Craig. And I think that there's enough blame to go around. And I say this, as as someone who has certainly not defended Antanasio in that regime. I think that there are so many things that the club could do better and differently than they currently do. And they needed to do different things at the deadlines in just about all of the past 6 seasons, and so much mismanagement. So nothing I'm saying about Counsell going to the Cubs is at all excusing ownership in this whatsoever, just to be clear.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, it is what it is. We'll wait till our next podcast to talk about possible managerial candidates. I mean, who knows how quickly the Brewers will act on that. But really, it's just shocking and disappointing and heartbreaking. And there's not really nothing to say about it other than, as a diehard Brewer fan, and for us here on the show and all our listeners, just to give you a little bit of hope, I will say that during the last number of years, whenever the Brewers beat the Cubs, I would text out the L flag that was once proudly flown at Miller Park to everyone in our text group. And I'm gonna, each time we do that, once we beat Craig Counsell and the Chicago Cubs, it's gonna be that much more sweeter. And so that's the only thing I guess I can look forward to. Because yeah, it's gonna, like, he's now on enemy territory. And as much as I think he's an intelligent guy and love the guy for the last 20 years, as you mentioned, he's been a Brewer as long as we've done the Brook review, and now all of a sudden he's not. I just cannot root for him being the manager of the Cubs, and especially he'll be leading our division rival, and we'll be setting out to beat him and his squad every time we go out there. So.
Oh, absolutely. And you did raise a good question, which is, if the Brewers did know about the fact that Craig was likely not coming back in early September, are we prepared to name a manager like in the next couple of days? As we tape this, it's Tuesday, the day after the news broke about Craig. So we've had about 24 hours or so to digest it. But, the Brewers have already started interviewing candidates. Pat Murphy was back in Milwaukee for an interview this morning, as confirmed by our anonymous source, Tom Carter, who's at the stadium today. So I do know that Pat was in for an interview, and we can talk about candidates when we tape another podcast next week. But by that time, maybe we'll already have a new manager.
It's possible. And I know Carlos Villanueva and Ricky Weeks, two former Brewers, names have been thrown out there as possible candidates too. So there'll be some interesting players in the mix, and I'm sure it'll be someone completely out of left field that we're not thinking of, maybe. But Pat Murphy seems like someone that's probably near the top of the list, if there is a list being generated.
Yeah, and I know that. Yeah, Pat's been there for a number of years as Craig's bench coach, obviously since 2018, I believe, 2017, one of the two. But I know, like I said, besides our anonymous source, that our own host, Scott Bartell, who couldn't make it today, is traveling up to Milwaukee to keep tabs on who might be interviewing for the position.
Yeah, thanks to Scott and his interns for doing all that legwork. Yeah, so disappointment, but we're going to forge on into the off season. We'll talk a little bit more next episode also about some player movement and which guys are coming back, which guys aren't. And, as we march toward hot stove season fairly quickly, we'll try to remain positive, and hopefully this is just turning the page into a new chapter of Milwaukee Brewers history, and we'll be here for it. So hopefully our listeners will be as well. So
that's right. Yeah, good point on all the above. And GM meetings start this weekend, so hot stove is already kicking in, Craig.
Awesome. All right, looking forward to it, Vince. So remember, West Dallas, stay classy and go Brewers.
Go Brewers. Do, 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 do.